practice at the Emilia is the coordinator, evidence-based practice at the University of Southern Queensland Library. They contribute to developing an evidence-based culture in the library, including through practice-based research to support service improvement, professional practice, decision-making, and value and impact. Emilia has worked in academic and school libraries and is also a PhD student at Curtin University. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will hand over to you.
Thank you. It's great to be here with everyone. So I'm speaking about a case study in the makerspace at the University of Southern Queensland Library that I undertook with Steph Piper. So I'm in the role of evidence-based practice coordinator, and Steph is the community engagement coordinator, and she looks after the makerspace. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about our process of incorporating a visual method into a research design, as well as some of the findings that developed from that. I'll also note that while all the photos included in my slides today are from the UniSQ Makerspace, none of them were actually from the case study or the interviews either. So just for some context, the University of Southern Queensland is a multi-campus regional university, and the Makerspace is physically located on the Toowoomba campus and has workshops and resources also hosted online. And the Makerspace is designed as a community space, so it's meant to be used by both students and staff for hands-on projects and activities. It's also accessed by some members of the public, and it includes equipment for digital fabrication, such as resources for 3D printing and 3D scanning, as well as resources for electronics, soldering, crafting, and the like. And the Makerspace is interdisciplinary, so it can be used for a range of projects related to research, learning, teaching, or any other extracurricular uses as well. And there is still a need for further research into makerspaces within universities. And so while this study was relevant to our own local context, we're also hoping that it contributes to some of those gaps in the literature. So this study came out of wanting to understand how students and staff were using a makerspace within a regional university library. And as part of this, we considered the services that the Makerspace was offering around 3 different usage modes: curriculum-based, extracurricular, and research. Initially, we were interested in patterns of usage across these 3 modes from the perspectives of users themselves. The impact of the pandemic on how the Makerspace was used did mean that it was a challenge to recruit enough people to understand usage patterns in the way that we'd hoped to, especially since we're using a purposive and convenient sample for this study. So the questions that we were asking at this point actually started to shift to looking at how a range of users across those 3 usage types were experiencing participation in the space. And this informed our 2 research questions: how are UniSQ Makerspace users engaging with the space and its activities? And what can users' own experience of participation tell us about the Makerspace's value for research, course curriculum, and extracurricular benefit? And so to explore users' own insights, we decided to employ a visual method during the data collection phase. And this ended up influencing the overarching research design, the analysis, and the findings in ways that we didn't initially anticipate, and some of them were actually quite subtle as well. So this was a qualitative study, and it was designed around an interpretive understanding of users' experiences. And including that visual element within this approach also aligned with the very nature of the Makerspace itself. The technology and the projects in the Makerspace are very tactile, they're hands-on, and they involve visual outputs. And so we were aiming to bring that visual element into the interviews themselves. And we used a purposive sample in the study, and we selected participants based on their sustained use of the Makerspace within any of those 3 usage modes. And this meant that the sample was based on our prior understanding of the types of projects that the Makerspace is being used for, especially Steph, who's actually embedded in the Makerspace and working directly with those students and staff members. And by making sustained use criteria for inclusion, we did have a very small population of current students and research staff that we could include, who weren't just going to be once-off participants. So we ended up conducting 4 semi-structured interviews. 2 student participants had been introduced to the Makerspace through their coursework, and they'd gone on to do placements there. A 3rd student used the Makerspace entirely for extracurricular projects, and that included their own personal projects and some community-based volunteering work as well. And then we had a 4th participant who was a research staff member who was using the Makerspace for their work, as well as for personal projects. And we conducted all of the interviews via Zoom, and participants were invited to share any visual media at any stage across the interviews to help describe their use of the makerspace. So the approach that we adopted was a variation of a photo voice technique. Originally, we were considering a photo elicitation method where we'd provide photos of the makerspace during the interviews to prompt conversation around usage patterns. But as we started to change the research questions that we were asking, moving away from usage patterns, we realized that asking users to share photos themselves really gave an opportunity to highlight some of the creative and innovative processes that they'd actually been engaged in. And it provided a unique way for them to be participating in the interview and to share work that was meaningful to them and how they chose to engage with the space. And we then expanded that photo voice technique to include objects or any visual media that related to a makerspace project or activity. So while some of the studies, including in other university makerspaces, have referred to this as object elicitation, we didn't feel like this was an entirely accurate term in our own context. But participants were invited to bring any existing media, objects, or designs, any visual media really, that related to their use of the makerspace, just to help guide those conversations about the projects and the context that they existed in. It wasn't required that anyone did share any visual media, but everyone knew that they were welcome to. And we expected that any objects or visual media would already exist. They'd represent how a user had previously or continued to engage with the makerspace, rather than being something that they created specifically as part of our research project. And this also meant that any objects or tools could be used as used for reflection during the interviews. So this was helping to connect individual projects to the skills, knowledge, and support, as well as the value that had informed them, and also provide an opportunity to provide any feedback around their use of the makerspace. And we'd included an interview question that asked participants to tell us about their most recent project, and we anticipated that that might be a point where they could choose to share a photo or object to help describe it. Initially, many of the advantages of this method were seen in the interview stage because it was encouraging that engagement and sharing. The approach was flexible. It was allowing participants to determine what and when they would share. And by having that choice to share projects or to just describe them verbally, participants could choose when they wanted to center their own projects in the conversation, and they could determine how much significance the physical object or visual representation of it held to describing their own experiences. Additionally, having that visual element could also serve as a visual memory prompt, helping to elicit more detailed descriptions across the interview. And a lot of research that does use object elicitation requires that participants select a single object of meaning. Or in the case of photo voice techniques, it might require that participants have a set of criteria or prompts around what they're photographing. In the context of a university makerspace, where participants not only have varied types of use, but they might be staff, students, or both, we really want to open the interviews up to be a reflection of what was meaningful to participants, rather than setting them up with prescriptive criteria around what projects they could or couldn't bring. And this meant that our own assumptions about what was important as library staff could be challenged, because participants were the ones who were determining what was actually important to share. So all of the student participants shared visual media throughout the interviews. And because the interviews were semi-structured, there was that flexibility for the participant to not only guide the conversation, but to engage in unstructured ways that couldn't be accounted for in a structured interview. I certainly expected that participants would only choose one project to share, but on the contrary, over the course of the interviews, students were remembering other projects that they just happened to have on hand. And since they were at home over Zoom, they'd suggest another object or some designs or sketches and ask if it was okay to go retrieve and share them too. And this actually highlighted the relevance of some of these projects outside of the university, as well as what users anticipated their future use of the space might look like as they continue to develop more ideas and new projects. So in the last quote on my slide here, the participant not only talked through the process of using the makerspace for their project, but they were describing its purpose in the context of their living arrangement. So through this, they described motivations for ongoing use of the space that went beyond skills development. For this participant, having a visual element and flexibility in where the interview took place really helped to prompt discussion around their own innovation and problem solving and the value that the makerspace had provided beyond the university. They connected this project to how they used the makerspace to take a new perspective, as they talked through the visual design, demonstrated its use, purpose, as well as its functionality. Looking to the interview questions themselves, these covered initial engagement, use and focus, outcomes and learning, and future use. The thematic analysis that we did was inductive, and we were looking to identify patterns of shared meaning across the entirety of the transcripts, not within responses to each individual question or category of questions. And because of the flexibility of when participants could choose to introduce visual media, these stages or categories of questions were actually very iterative, and the transcripts didn't represent a linear conversation across them. So through reflexive thematic analysis, 5 themes were developed from the transcripts, and these were a tentative start, practical need, skills development, community connection, and influencing outlook. And together these themes were really presenting a narrative of users' engagement with the makerspace that developed from a tentative curiosity to finding value in new perspectives and skills. So for the first theme, a tentative start, this explored users' initial hesitancy and apprehension around using the makerspace. So students and staff were expressing uncertainty around how they might be involved. They were unsure of the purpose of the makerspace and even its relevance to them. And this extended to interview participants reflecting on their own current use and the visibility of the makerspace within the university, especially across the pandemic. And they were reflecting on how other students and researchers might be experiencing similar barriers to engaging or understanding the purpose of the makerspace. So some users had resigned themselves to the idea that the makerspace didn't align with their study choices or areas of research, or that they might be intruding or couldn't be involved. Users also thought that the makerspace was a creative arts initiative, unique to only that academic discipline, and this contributed to some uncertainty around who could actually access it. It left the impression that the space didn't correspond with other programs of study, including the health sciences. So despite being an interdisciplinary space, there were some interesting questions and considerations that came out of this theme around belonging. Additionally, the software and equipment in the makerspace was being described as huge and intimidating initially. So despite that excitement and curiosity, there was that hesitancy around how to approach using any of the equipment, especially if the coordinator wasn't there to provide support early on. For the second theme, practical motivations were often driving users' initial engagement. So participants were sharing how they recognized the makerspace was a reliable alternative to other sites, or how it was practical course requirements that were driving their initial engagement. So in some instances, the makerspace was fulfilling a practical need for research and work-related equipment, presenting this cost-effective and efficient alternative to other spaces in the university. So it was about improving productivity after having found a space that was reliable. In other instances, it was about achieving graduation and was driven entirely by course requirements and practical assessment. And since makerspace users often assumed it was a creative arts initiative before they became involved, we found that having an introduction embedded in their coursework helped to demonstrate that practical relevance of the space and the need it filled in that way. And these introductions were still highlighting the creative opportunities in the makerspace, which also helped to generate interest. But importantly, they were demonstrating to students that the makerspace was a place that they could belong through its applicability to their studies, especially for placement and assessment. And the third theme is skills development. We start to recognize how users engaged the makerspace for the purpose of acquiring new technical skills. So this was leading to independent and continuous learning. And some of the feedback during the interviews included requests for more workshops at a higher level, that next step up in skills to help support this. So participants were recognizing the makerspace might be the starting point for their journey into 3D printing and other digital fabrication technologies. So they were describing learning new programs, equipment, and processes. And this theme saw participants shift from a position of not knowing where to start skills-wise to feeling comfortable using technology in the space, buying their own 3D printers, and also seeking out external learning opportunities. Additionally, that significance of having the community engagement coordinator to support the skills development was continually emphasized. So practically, the coordinator taught staff and students new skills and provided resources for this, but was also contributing to how comfortable and confident users felt in learning. And this brought up one of the barriers that was highlighted in the earlier tentative start theme, that the coordinator wasn't available in the makerspace their new or potential users were unable to jump into participating. One student described how if they'd gone in needing help or wanting to print something a couple of years earlier and the coordinator wasn't in, they probably would have just walked out. So it was because of the coordinator's role that they were able to have the confidence to be in there at that point. And this meant that we could identify staffing as a requisite for initial engagement, use, and access to the makerspace. And so much of this was connected to students discussing their recent projects. So with the project actually at hand, they went beyond describing just the output or the result, but they shared the process and the support that went into creating it. And this is where having a visual prompt in the interviews really helped. Students moved from just listing the skills they had learned to talking about how all of these skills fit together as part of a holistic learning process to produce the final project. So during one interview, a student remembered some preliminary designs they had sketched and suggested that it might be helpful to show these to me as well. And they walked me through how all of these skills that they'd learned helped to translate those sketches into their final project. And this was really starting to highlight the value that the makerspace was providing in not just tangible ways, but intangible ways as well along the way across that process. So acquiring new skills wasn't just seen as a one-off event. It was a process that was embedded into an individual's project that saw ideas turned into designs, into digital media, and then eventually into that final physical output. In the fourth theme, community connection, this focuses on the makerspace as a community hub with a range of engagement and connection throughout users' experiences. So some of this connection was between students and other times it was with the community engagement coordinator. But that community connection also extended beyond UniSQ to include volunteer work and creative solutions in workplaces and home environments. And we also found that there were different understandings of what collaboration meant in the makerspace. And different interpretations of this actually appeared conflicting, creating a lot of nuance within this theme itself. So some participants described their project work as collaborative and others as independent. But those who described it as independent were also focusing on the value of connecting with their peers and the community engagement coordinator to discuss ideas, find new solutions, or also just out of interest to see how other people's projects were progressing. So opportunities to contribute to wider communities and sharing or co-constructing knowledge as part of that learning experience were all seen as valuable and helped to positively inform the experience of undertaking independent projects. And that sense of connectivity, receiving ongoing advice from peers or the coordinator, and just being around like-minded students and staff who are willing to help was really key to how students and staff both experienced using this space. It was a non-class and interdisciplinary space that was built around this shared interest and participation. And in the final theme, influencing outlook, this was developed from the value that those new opportunities, directions, and perspectives were providing outside of the makerspace. So that included the value of applying innovative and creative processes in workplaces, homes, and future endeavours. Non-technical skills and qualities such as problem solving really contributed to this theme. And participants recognised new ways of thinking about how creativity, technology, and science could all work together and be connected to future opportunities. So within this theme, we saw new approaches and creative solutions being tried in the workplace or at home. And it was about going beyond the technical skills learned to understanding the processes that take something from just an idea to a solution that provides value and how this applies beyond the university and can also help others. And some of this theme actually appears to conflict with the practical needs theme. In that theme, we saw this idea of just needing to get placement out of the way and an initial detachment from some of the more creative processes and experiences in the makerspace. However, we can make sense of this as a narrative that was developed across the interviews, transcripts, and the analytical process. The findings aren't being reduced to only showing the impact or the difference that the makerspace had at the end of a placement or a project. Instead, what we see is this common narrative across engagement. And this was one that really highlighted the different stages and types of value experienced by users as they described their own experiences and processes and the time taken to explore what was on offer and the impact that it might have for them. So when we start by looking at that initial curiosity and hesitancy, we find that embedding an introduction to the makerspace in courses helps to facilitate access and introduce both its relevance to study and research, as well as some of those more creative components. And we see recognition that the makerspace has relevance and a very practical and functional value. And at this point, we also see that opportunities for skills development and community connection are being realised by participants. And so it's during this ongoing engagement in the space itself and with the coordinator that some of those new perspectives, knowledge, and future pathways are realised and actually start to make a difference outside of the university, opening up new solutions and opportunities as they progress with their experience in through the makerspace. And I've got references there if anyone does want to screenshot those, but otherwise, thank you.